Hello, my name is Adam Leonard from People Development within Google here, and I'm really excited about introducing my friend Daniel Rechtschaffen today for the talk, and in particular as one of the founders of GPause, which is Google's global meditation community of practitioners. One of the things that inspires me the most is the ripple effects that this practice has through society, becoming more mindful. And Daniel will talk today about the ripple effects within the educational system and children. So let me give you a little bit about his background, and then I'll turn it over to Daniel. So Daniel's a marriage and family therapist here in the Bay Area, and the author of the book, The Way of Mindful Education, Cultivating Well-Being in Teachers and Students. And we have copies of the book over here after the talk. And so Daniel leads mindfulness and education trainings, both at conferences around the world, in addition to several different educational institutions. He also teaches mindfulness to high school basketball and baseball teams, which I thought was interesting. So let me turn it over to Daniel.
Hello, everybody. I've been teaching mostly in elementary school recently, so you all look rather big to me and a little serious. So I figured I'd start off by bringing in a little bit of levity and playfulness. With little kids, you need to play mindfulness. You need to, instead of paying attention, you need to be playing attention. If I'm trying to go in and teaching kids how to focus and to regulate their emotions, it's going to become really boring really fast. And it's going to feel like that old game where your parents say, let's see who can be quiet the longest. And kids know really quick that's no kind of game. No, this doesn't sound like a game. So let's do a little bit of movement. I always start with some movement with kids because I see some people have some food, so you might just for a little moment put the food down. We'll just do a few little movements to get us more present and relaxed here in our bodies. And often when I teach, I tell people, especially teachers, I train a lot of teachers, and I say, let's pretend to be kids for a minute. And when you say that to teachers and adults, they're even worse than little kids. You'll get like a spitball immediately in the eye. So be your adult self, but let's do some movements. So let's start with a few Spider-Man breaths. So let's breathe in and breathe out and shoot out your webs. And how about some dolphin breaths? Breathing in. And some crocodile breaths. And a few butterfly breaths. And how about a couple, I've been working a few hours and I'm really stressed breaths. So lift up your shoulders and tighten them. Breathe out and relax. Let's do a few of those. And then see if you can just be as still as a statue and notice as you breathe if any parts of your body are moving. Even though you're trying to be still, see where the movement in your body is. Okay, thank you for paying attention with me. It's very often for adults and for kids, it's really easy, like if I came in here and said, let's learn some mindfulness and practice for 30 minutes, a lot of you would start to equate mindfulness with this profoundly frustrating experience. And our brains would actually link that up, right? Link up And that's probably why when we are like, oh, I should really practice mindfulness this morning, everything in our bodies kind of yells, don't do it. It's so annoying. It's because very often when we try to do it, we do it outside of our range. And so for kids, the range might be 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And so for me to do these fun movements, then as you saw, I progressively got a little bit smaller until I did this very fun, accessible, see what happens when you are breathing, feeling the movement. And immediately kids will come back and say, I think I felt my heart beating, or I could feel my, my hips going in and out like a balloon as I was breathing. You'll get these fascinating inner awareness that's being cultivated, and you don't have to be, top heavy with it, telling them, okay, now you're going to have to be still. Okay, Joey, stop moving. Okay, Sally, and you really just invite them into this fun inner exploration. So I wanted to begin, give a little overview of mindfulness in education and how it's spreading. One of the organizations that I really love that's doing some amazing work is an organization called the Holistic Life Foundation, and they're in Baltimore. They're good buddies of mine. And just to show what they've been doing in the Baltimore schools, and they have all of these things in the different school settings where they'll have a mindfulness room, and the mindfulness room will always be having this kind of soothing music. They even have these like essential oil blends that are putting out nice scents, and the room is just a space for them to be able to, for the students to be able to come. So when they've had a fight, when there's a conflict, teachers won't send the kids to the principal, they'll send them to the mindfulness room. And in the mindfulness room, the kids aren't like punished, what have you done? They're invited just to be present and talk about what's going on. And so during all of the conflict and difficulty that's been happening in Baltimore, every day the Holistic Life Foundation, Ali and Atman Smith and Andy Gonzalez, they've been doing these mindfulness days in the park. So while the city was burning, they were getting people together to be able to meditate on what those really difficult emotions that are arising in their bodies are about, and having these amazing conversations. They have trained, they're all from inner city Baltimore, and have trained all of their facilitators are these young kids who've come through their program, and now they've given them jobs to go into all of these other Baltimore schools to be able to be teaching how to regulate emotion, how to be able to develop executive functioning, how to be able to cultivate empathy. There's all of this really amazing research that's been around for a while, but for some reason it hasn't been disseminated as widely as it should in terms of social and cultural diversity work. There's an amazing study called the ACE study. I don't know if any of you have known about the ACE study, where it's for the Adverse Childhood Experiences test, and it talks about the different traumas or major stresses that people have had in their life. So if you've had adverse experiences, whether that's a real kind of capital T trauma, like some type of physical or sexual abuse, or even just living in an environment that's very stressful, even that's often in the schools around here, where there's this incredible push and stress for kids to achieve. So if you're growing up with all of these stressors, I'll just read a few of the things that it predicts. So one of the first amazing things is if you have a lot of these very intense stressors, traumas, your life expectancy is 20 years less, which is rather amazing. People with high ACE scores are 3 times as likely to experience academic failure, 6 times as likely to have behavioral problems, and 5 times as likely to have attendance problems. So we set up kids in a very disturbing environment, and their brain architecture, that we're really finding that the architecture of the brain, even the genetics, is changed by stress levels. Even more amazingly, more recent research is finding that the levels of stress can change the genetics which gets passed on to their kids. So there's these high levels of trauma and stress, whether that's, I work a lot in the, one day I'll be in like a Berkeley very privileged school, and I'll see the intense stressors that these kids are under to achieve. And then the next day I'll be in an inner city Oakland school where there's very different types of stressors, but all stressors. And this stress physically affects the body and really hijacks the mind to be able to be present and to think and to be creative. So all of the testing that we throw on our kids, all of this really intense high-stakes testing actually dumbs the mind down. It puts people in even more of a kind of fight or flight or a freeze response. So such a big part of the mindfulness training that I do, the emotional intelligence training, is first, how do we get kids to feel comfortable and relaxed and present in their bodies? So one of the big things I've also been tracking recently is you probably all saw the news around New York and a lot of the other states that opted out of tests. So 175,000 students in New York opted out of the standardized testing. In some places, it was 70% of the entire school district. The kids said, we're not taking these tests. So there's a big shift happening in education. I recently had somebody from Silicon Valley who's trying to start a school. And he came to me and said, I want to create this school. I consult with a lot of different schools, bringing in mindfulness and emotional intelligence around the world. But what was particularly amazing for me about what this gentleman was bringing was that he was saying that they were going to bring a lot of what you all at Google are developing amazingly. They're bringing all of the tech in information, kind of Khan Academy style information, so all the information that's going to be delivered is going to be from the great scientists and professors from the great institutions around the world. And what that does is it completely frees up the teachers. They're no longer information purveyors. And what they are becoming now, in this school that I'm consulting with, what they are going to become is emotional intelligence, mindfulness, kind of helping the kids find meaning, helping them be creative, helping them find their path in life, helping them understand how to access knowledge, helping them understand to be their best people, which is an amazing shift because so many teachers that I talk with tell me that about half of their time anyways is basically as a social worker, trying to get their kids to stop moving around. They have so much ADHD, there's so much dysregulation. If I could explain the numbers of the anxiety and depression that's like going through the roof with kids as young as in kindergarten, or kids are getting diagnoses at these incredibly young ages. So for the teachers to actually be there as these holistic support systems, and then to be able to give them all of this information that's readily accessible. So what I want to do is to walk through what mindfulness and what's called social emotional learning, some fun ways that it's offered and what it actually can do. So there's 5 different realms that I look at of different types of literacy, not just what Common Core does, which is just kind of math and language, but 5 deeper realms of literacy, which are the literacy of our bodies, the literacy of our minds, literacy of our hearts, literacy around the social world, and then literacy around kind of our ecology, our understanding of our place in nature and the world. So we can start with the literacy of our bodies. I just did a little bit with you around just those Spider-Man breaths. So that's us learning how to be in touch, relaxed, connected to our bodies. Adam was telling me before about how he does some work with veterans who are returning from war. And he said he starts by doing these great rafting trips and fun things with them, getting them in their body, and teaching them about mindfulness through getting into the flow, getting connected to what's alive all around them. So there's all these different access points. So I start with kids. If their minds are hijacked, which so many of them are, how do we help them drop into their bodies to integrate? So the first thing, and I'll walk us all through some exercises to be experiential. If everybody just puts up one hand, and why don't we look at it for a moment and just kind of explore this hand that is always typing and doing everything for you, but you probably haven't actually taken a look at all the little lines and colors in it. And then you could let your eyes close. And since your eyes are closed, how do you know that your hand is there? What are the physical sensations that you can feel in there? And maybe why don't you feel the other hand? See what sensations are in the other hand. Are they different? Are they the same? The fingers, the palm. See if you can get really interested. And then how about feeling both hands at the same time? Okay. Thank you for playing that with me. So often with kids, what I'll do is I'll really give them a language for their physical experience. We'll go through our bodies, maybe we'll pick something up and do, write with a pencil in slow motion, feeling the way the hand moves, doing different types of slow motion movements, really learning the sensations. I'll go up on the blackboard and have kids say, what can you feel in your body? And I'll show you as we go through the mind, the heart, why we need to start with this kind of physical literacy, understanding how the body feels, how it moves, what it means to be relaxed, what it means to be stressed, teaching kids where stress is in the body and what it feels like. So really giving them this language of the physical body. Then I move on, once the kids are relaxed, they're present, I move on to some mind training. So teaching them how to, what we talk a lot about as building the muscles of attention. And there's something about this attention practice that I'm sure all of you, and still in schools I hear over and over again, teachers yelling at kids to pay attention or not to be distracted. But we don't teach them how to pay attention or how not to get distracted or how to be calm, how to be relaxed in their body. So there's really precise, clear ways to develop this sense of attention. One of the ways that kids seem to really love exploring it is a game that I call the distraction game. So I'll go into a classroom and I'll teach kids how to take their hands and put them on their bellies and just to feel their breath moving in and out. And then what I'll do is I will walk around, and usually most schools I'm in, there's lots of like pencil jars and things you can make noises with. And I'll say, who thinks they can be totally focused even if I try to distract them? And kids really like this, and so they'll put up their hands, and I'll go around and I'll start, making noises and opening the door and jumping around and being silly, and they're really trying to keep their focus on their breath. Well, call it the base camp breath. They have them really stay right there. And the kids are so interested in it, and then a bunch of the other kids will say, "Can I try that?" And I'm like, "Okay, let's all do it." And then eventually I'll ask for some distractors assistance. And so usually, pretty much always, I'll choose the kids who are the most distracting, the ones that are always distracting the rest of the class. And I'll let them get up and kind of walk around the room making noise and rattling things and trying to distract kids. And I'll explore in real time the dynamics that are happening in the classroom. So asking them, what was it like? What does it feel like in your body when you so want to open your eyes or you so want to giggle? Kids will I'll be like, okay, yeah, if you want, you can try to tell some jokes and get kids to laugh. See what it's like to try to stay regulated. So they're actually practicing regulation. They're really working with integrating their brains so that they can keep this kind of sense of integration and calming their amygdala down so that they can have more executive functioning in their brains. And we can really talk to them about this. If they're little kids, you can talk to them about the lizard brain, which captures the top part of your brain, the neocortex, and how we can let the lizard relax by doing these breaths, and then the mind can work more in a more sharp way. Once I do that, we can actually teach kids, and definitely high school students, middle school students, but even really young children can start learning how not just to be aware of distraction of kind of externals, but how they're distracted by their own thoughts, how their own mental constructions, whether they're kind of destructive thoughts about themselves or whether they're just random thoughts about the movie they want to go see. And then here, let's all put our hand on our belly for another second. And what we could do is you could let your eyes close. And what we can explore is just anchoring our attention in the breath. So you're feeling your breath going in and out of your belly. And what you could notice is anytime a thought pops into your head, our brains are kind of like popcorn makers, but instead of making thoughts, or instead of making popcorn, they make thoughts. Anytime a thought goes through your head, just pop your hand up and just kind of lift it up in the air. And then bring it back, and when you're bringing your hand back to your belly, you're bringing your attention back to the breath. The physical sensation of the belly like a balloon getting bigger and smaller. And anytime the mind pops with a thought, and if you're wondering if you're thinking that's a thought itself, you can always just pop it in the air, collect yourself, and bring the hand back to the belly. So let's try that for a minute. It's amazing to watch and listen to what students say about this. So you'll get like a second grade class. So young children who really start witnessing how their own minds are hijacking them and how they're building these muscles of attention, learning how to stay, like a kid the other day said, like, yeah, always when I'm reading, I'll be reading and my eyes will go down to the bottom of the page, and then I'll realize that I've gotten to the bottom of the page, but I wasn't actually taking in the words. And I'm trying to build my muscles of attention so that I can actually, read it and then finish it and then, play some baseball or something like that, right? So they really understand this capacity to keep the attention focused. So once I've developed these muscles of attention, so awareness of our minds, awareness of our bodies, then we move on to the emotions. And so there's this really profound way that we bring the body and the attention together for basic impulse control, basic emotional regulation. So we talk to kids all the time about, don't steal the cookie from the cookie jar, don't hit your brother, don't do these things, don't react. We look at a place like Baltimore and say, don't do that, don't destroy this building in your own city. But when there's so much emotion, when there's so much hurt, when there's so much difficulty, students, we haven't really taught kids what to do with that emotion. And so it needs to spill over. So it doesn't really make sense to punish them. Usually punishing, in the way we often punish, really just adds more kind of fire to it. So what we do is I usually explain to kids, like I imagine that my arm is a branch. And it's going up, and up here, all of these leaves, they're kind of like my thoughts. And so anytime there's like a lot of wind and the branch is going like this, it's kind of like I'm ruminating. I'm thinking about something a lot. I'm like churning about this argument I had with my wife. I'm churning about this thing that my boss said. And so anytime there's that hamster wheel of thinking, there's always a correlation. So if you follow the branch down into your body and check out in your throat and your chest and your stomach, somewhere in your body, there's always a physical correlation of how you actually physically feel to that ruminating thought. And usually what we do when we're ruminating, when we're really caught in something, is usually we think like, oh man, I can't believe she said that. What should I say next time? Maybe I'll do this. And that just pushes the hamster wheel more. And you all know this, I'm sure, right? This is why we can't fall asleep at night sometimes, is the mind is just working. And we think that maybe I'll be able to fix it by thinking our way out of it. Which is, if anybody's ever thought their way out of something like that, let me know. Because usually, even if we come up with a great thought, then we have to, would that work? How could I do that? Maybe. So what we can do, really the only place that there's some type of soothing and relaxation, is if we drop down into our bodies and locate where the physical experience is. So if the thought about, like this argument is there, there's probably some like agitation, heat in the chest, tightness in the belly, maybe the face is a little tight. And so with kids, once you've taught them the physical capacity, the physical literacy, they'll be able to find, oh yeah, there's this heat right here. There's this agitation right here. There's this discomfort. And then I do a lot of what I call the vacuum cleaner breath, where they suck in all of this uncomfortable energy into their belly. They relax it, really becoming aware of the physical experience. And that is where, what mindfulness basically is when we orient towards the present moment. What's happening right now? We open to what's happening right now instead of pushing away from it into our brains trying to think, how can we fix this or change this? It's a very simple orientation shift. And it's a little bit opposite, counterintuitive, that if you orient into pain or orient into agitation, when we bring our kind of openness, our heartfulness, it actually relaxes. It soothes. That's most of the research in the beginning of mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction was about chronic pain. And if you actually bring your attention into a chronic back pain, it actually relaxes instead of tightening against it, which adds more pain. Right? So with kids, I do these very basic explanations. Maybe I'll have them picture somebody that they're annoyed with. And they'll picture them, and then you can actually feel physically what that's like. And then to actually feel it and to breathe and to relax. And instead of, very often I'll hear in schools, even schools that don't teach mindfulness, they'll say, take 3 deep breaths when you're angry. But usually when kids do that, they just go, and then they just go right back to it, right? Instead of really getting, like, okay, so when I actually notice that I'm agitated and they can catch it, oh, there it is. Okay, there's tightness, there's a little bit of like butterflies. Okay, I'm present with it, I'm breathing with it, I'm noticing it, I'm relaxing it. And when we do that and we reinforce it over and over again, it's life-changing. There's all of this research around impulse control as one of the major predictors around, who will go to prison, how well people are going to do on tests, how successful academically they'll be, just by their early capacity to be able to be present with their impulses. So with the emotional work, both we're learning to work with the intense emotions, and then we're also learning to cultivate the more kind of beneficial, sweet compassion, empathy, joy, happiness. All of these beautiful practices that we can do around gratitude, often I'll have people bring in a kind of a picture of somebody that for them, is the most compassionate person in their minds or their hearts, whether it's one of their grandparents or whether it's Mother Teresa, and to picture them and then to really bring in that energy and to start actually bringing that compassion into the world. So students learn how to work with the difficult emotion, to cultivate the empathy. Then the fourth piece that I like to do is more of the social, cultural work. And right now, one of the things I'm really fascinated about with this is what's happening in Baltimore, what's happening around our country, it has been for a long time, around diversity, around how we have so much assumptions about racism, and how we can actually teach kids to open their minds up, to develop empathy in a very, in a physical way. And when I say physical, often it's very easy to go in and tell people, you should be nice to each other, you should do this. That doesn't really help most of the time. It feels like another should. But when we can teach kids to really feel in their bodies, one practice I've been doing recently is I'll put like an object up on a table, and I'll have everybody just look at this one object and just kind of have a mindfulness practice on it for a minute or so. And just looking at it, and just since we've already been doing a lot of these attention practices, have them just have this relaxed mind, breathing, and just seeing as they're looking at it what assumptions come up about this object. Noticing if they really like it, if they dislike it, if they have a judgment, if they have a correlation. And amazingly, even if you just put a bottle or a book, afterwards the whole class is going to fill in. I got so annoyed looking at that book, or I love that book, or I had this assumption because my brother hit me with a book one time, and you're going to get all of this stuff in there, and teaching kids the ways that we develop assumptions, and then helping them understand how we all have that towards each other, how we put each other in boxes, and how mindfulness can actually help us see each other in this much more clear and conscious way. So another one of the main practices that I do, and I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes because I want to be able to really open some conversation for all of you. One of the other practices that I love to do is around the present moment. And so teaching kids, I'll ask a lot of questions about, what is the past? And they'll explain what happened, the dinosaurs, and that they tripped on the way to school this morning, and all these things that happened. And then what's in the future, that there's going to be, we're going to be on Mars, or that my birthday is on Sunday, or whatever it is. And then asking them, what is right now in the present moment? And I'll teach kids to be able to communicate with each other from just what's happening in the present moment, which is a very fascinating practice if anybody has ever really tried to do this, to have a conversation back and forth where the rules are, the only thing you can say is, my back is hurting a little bit right now, the lights are a little heavy in my eyes, I'm feeling my voice and my larynx as I'm talking. So actually to be able to really just speak present moment and seeing what happens to people when you take away all story and learn how to communicate in this very empathic present moment way. So the practices are really learning this landscape of empathy, of communication. And then the final stage is more of this kind of ecological awareness, which obviously right now is so important, understanding how we are connected to everything. I do a lot of work I love bringing kids out into nature. For me, there's no better teacher than the natural world. If you want to learn patience, you sit by a tree, you do something like that. And so really starting to learn and ask questions to kids about their environment, about how they're connected to their environment. So I just wanted to kind of walk through, there's these 5 main realms of literacy that in schools around the US, Canada, all over the world, whole school districts are starting to learn how to integrate this level of kind of critical thinking and awareness, so that kids can really master their own minds, and then can go out into the world in this much more empowered way. This work that's been happening around a big transformation in education, there's a bit of a revolutionary piece to it, because there's a lot of, I don't know if you know how the Texas school board's kind of curriculum committee is the one, for some reason, that makes all the decisions about curriculum, mostly in the entire country. Usually the ones that Texas chooses is what most of the schools follow. And a big part of the Texas Republican platform came out a couple of years ago saying that they were opposed to critical thinking skills when they were trying, because they thought that it was going to, they thought that it would undermine values. And so nothing against Republicans or specific people, but that basic concept of critical thinking skills and teaching kids how to think for themselves and to be creative, the way that Google here kind of, some of the ways that this organization is set up for you to have free thinking. We're needing that in our educational paradigm. And it isn't like that right now. It's all very top-down, follow what we say, memorization, information memorization, not much transformation, not much change, not much creativity, not much openness. Literal, very clear pushback about kids doing these types of mindfulness practices, which are going to be a liberation practice, kind of a waking up practice, where they're going to learn, who am I? What is my body? What is my mind? What is my heart? What is the world around me? How am I connected to everything? So there's a big transformation that needs to happen in our world in order for the ecological system, the social system, for things to be more healthy. And mindfulness as a practice is the exact antidote that I'm looking to as a way to help kids wake up, to help to see better. So what I would love to do, we have a bunch of time, but what I would love to do is to open this up and just have some questions and some dialogue. We have about 20 minutes, because it's always a little more interesting to get some cross-pollination.
Is there any way that technology can help people to be more, mindful and just create more like compassionate people? Or is it actually taking people away from that?
So I'm so happy you asked it, especially here at Google. Do you have an idea?
Not really. I mean, not exactly.
Okay. So there's a lot to this. So There are some apps that are coming out that I actually really appreciate. Mostly, so the apps that I'm appreciating are apps that are around empathy and compassion and mindfulness, where the kids are doing something in the app, and then the app has little kind of assignments for them. Okay, now go do 2 random acts of kindness, and then come back, and then you get to this level. And so for me, to learn to develop emotionally, you need to do it interpersonally. You actually need to be in contact with others and not just somebody on the other side of the computer. It needs to be, there's something about the actual resonant fields of 2 bodies, the emotion, the mirror neurons that are actually waking up when you're across from somebody. So I think that there's some amazing stuff that technology can do. And obviously, just with all of the work that's happening, where there's these amazing interconnected webs where we know about Nepal, all of a sudden we know about here, we know about Syria, and we're able to hear so much more. We're able to develop that empathy. But on a really basic, as a therapist, I work with mostly adults, but I work with individuals around what it really takes to heal and grow. And it takes a lot. So it's basically down to like attachment theory, which means our most core wounds are around ways that we weren't loved, ways we weren't met, ways that we don't really trust each other. And in order to change that, it needs to be in person. Whether it's a therapist or a community or a loving relationship, that's where these your mind can be like, oh yeah, I trust that, but the body's still like, I don't know about that. What I would say is that if technology is working with in-person relational support, it can be amazing. And at the same time, there's some great attention trainings that are online that work really well. So if you're just looking for basic attention training, there's some great online tools where you can follow something, or you can get biofeedback to see how well the breath is happening. So attention training, which is a little different than just mindfulness. Attention training can be trained in a lot of different ways, but there's often the metaphor of like in the military, well before mindfulness, they had something called sniper breath, which is focusing, regulating their breath to this extent so that they can shoot really well, which is not what I consider mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is you need to weave in this kind of empathic presence. So we can train some attention, but for this larger scale, like opening the awareness to the environment, to nature, to each other, which we're lacking so much. There was a research study that was just done out of UCLA where they took kids, one classroom, and brought them into like a nature retreat for a week, so no technology. The other school class just stayed there, and they brought them back and they gave them some emotional intelligence tests. So basically they, showing faces and getting them to see, oh, that's a sad face, that's a happy face. Very basic kind of showing how well can you recognize others' emotions, be empathic. And the kids who'd been in nature for the week scored way higher. Right? They hadn't done anything. They hadn't taught them anything about emotion. But just unplugging them for a week, let them just kind of drop in. I don't know why it did it, but there's something about getting them into a little bit more natural state. Right? So I'm a major proponent of using technology to help kids unplug, which I don't know exactly how that works. But we need that balance.
Towards the end, you talked about the transformation that you think needs to happen within the education system. I'm just wondering, for places where you've seen that start to happen, what does that look like? Where within the system does it start? What are the sort of conditions and characteristics that need to be in place? Yeah,
thank you so much for that. So there's actually a lot that's going on. So there's mindfulness itself, and then there's also social emotional learning. And it's a great organization called CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is in 8 of the major school districts and has been doing a few years of really intensive studies to find out how really integrating emotional intelligence into the whole school systems, how it works. It's in Oakland right now, has been for the last few years. In these 8 districts, the academic scores went up 11%, And for anybody in academics, like for academic scores to go up 11% from any intervention is like staggering. But the staggering piece about that is they weren't teaching any academics. This was purely emotional support. So getting the teachers, which is always important at first, train the teachers how to regulate their emotions, to be present, to focus. Then training kids how to be more aware of each other. So just this kind of relaxing of nervous systems that allows them to pay attention. What I've started, I started doing this work at an organization called Mindful Schools about 8 or 9 years ago in Oakland. And what we first were doing was just going into the classroom and teaching kids, which was amazing because we started seeing like, wow, this stuff really works. Kids really are able to be more empathic. They're able to pay attention better. But what would happen is I would teach, and then I would, thank the class, and I would get out, and I'd hear the teacher yelling at them, "Get back in your seats!" Like, oh, it doesn't work very well. It needs to be a systemic approach. So what I've done mostly in the last 4 or 5 years is training teachers. So I'll go to a school and I'll do a lot of professional development, a lot of work with them about, burnout and stress for teachers is huge. The dropout rate for teachers is higher than it is for kids. They're like, it's very, like most teachers leave within 3 years. So really teaching them how to regulate, how to pay attention to the kids, how to attune to them. So there's a lot of school districts around the country that are doing this. The way that it usually looks, it depends on the schools, but there's a lot of really good emotional intelligence curriculum. And the way that mindfulness usually works really beautifully is that mindfulness dovetails with all of this emotional intelligence work because, as I said before, if we're trying to teach kids empathy, we bring in these basic practices, which we'll have the class start every day with a little breathing, start have in the middle of the day do a little bit where they're aware of something that's triggering or frustrating them and doing some breath with it. So kind of throughout the day, integrating these practices around emotional regulation, around focus. And all different schools are doing it really creatively. Some have their own rooms or a kind of a corner of the room that's like what they call a peace corner, where if the kids are really stirred up, they self-refer themselves there instead of the teachers telling them. So they start learning this inner resilience, this inner capacity, so that they don't need to be punished, but that they can say, oh, wow, there's a lot going on in me. I need to go sit over here for a minute and regulate myself. So it looks a lot of different ways. One of the major ways, and one of the main things that I do is I have my book, and then I have a book that I'm about to publish, which is really a curriculum. And so there's a lot of schools that are using mindfulness-based curricula and training their teachers. That's really the best way, is if you really get the teachers trained in their own practice and then have some kind of workbooks that they can use with the kids rather than me having to go around the country, teaching little lessons or something. Really getting one of my major long-term visions would be how we could get this type of foundational training into every teaching college. So how could every teacher learn about how to work with their stress and the stress of their kids?
You go up a level with teachers. Is it ever necessary to go further up and work with administrators, etc.? Do teachers then run into issues with administrators who are feeling the pressure to get test scores up? And also, what kind of resistance do you ever get resistance from the adults in general when you're trying to teach this?
So let's take the two really important ones. So first one is, sometimes you get really lucky and you have an administrator who's already into mindfulness or something, and of course that's great. This needs to be systemic, right? Because the stress is everywhere. It's important to look around. It's easy to point fingers and think like, oh, that person is the evil person who's making this all, but everybody's under this stress. So I have a group of 30 administrators that I've been doing monthly calls with for the last year, talking with them about how to integrate this into their school. So it's so important. If you have an administrator shifting the environment for the teachers, and this is why it's more impact when I teach teachers, it's more impact when I teach administrators, because obviously if they're able to create a more empathic and relaxed state environment, that's huge. So yeah, it needs to go in everywhere. I mean, it needs to. There's One of our congressmen, Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan, actually has a mindfulness sitting group that he does in Congress. I talked to him because he came to a conference I lead. He was like, we had 3 people last time. That was the most people we'd had, but we're getting more. It's getting more. We need to spread this everywhere. In terms of resistance, mindfulness it's an introspective practice, right? So you can't force somebody to be introspective because being introspective is vulnerable, right? To look inside, if you lived your life really fast and doing, when you slow down, you're like, whoa, there's a lot going on in there. And so you can't force somebody to do that. It's, by its nature, if a kid's sitting there, I have no idea what's going on in their mind. I have no idea what's going on in your mind. You might have been checked out this entire talk. I don't know what's happening inside your brains. So all we can do is invite you to the feast of these practices. And so I always get some resistance from some people who don't really want it, and I never push. I never push kids. I never push parents or teachers or kids or administrators. One of the things that does come up and often is asked is around kind of the history of mindfulness and its Buddhist aspects, and if there's resistance there, because there's actually has been at least one that I know of school that got in trouble with the courts because they were doing what they thought was Buddhist practice. And there's a lot to that. For me, I'm not a Buddhist. A lot of these practices were developed in a Buddhist tradition, but for me, it's a much wider than a Buddhist tradition. This is about, I haven't used a word yet that seems religious, like we're talking about how to be good human beings. And I'm happy to bring from any tradition or any place some type of practice which won't turn anybody into a specific religion, but that's going to help people. People are afraid of that. Usually what I do is I'll invite people to the training or to watch the kids doing it, and pretty much always they're like, no, I could use this as well. There was just a big court judgment down in LA, Unified Schools, where there was a yoga program, and they were trying to get it kicked out, and the judge ruled against and said, yes, this seems like it comes from a yogic, a Hindu tradition, but it doesn't have any, spiritual words or spiritual aims or any, it's just movement and breathing. So I actually think that that's probably in years to come, as mindfulness gets huge, there might be some court cases that are going to be coming up on a larger scale of and for me, as I said with the Texas Republican platform, who said that we don't want to teach critical thinking skills, there's both a resistance to kind of, is this religion, which I think is a really good question. We don't want to teach religion in schools. But there's also a question about what mindfulness truly is, which is a self-inquiry practice. And we're teaching kids to question. And a lot of people in schools are afraid of that. For me personally, there's a lot about the school system that I question, and there might be, if people really inquire deeply, they would actually kind of rip it up at the seams and transform it. So it's a lot of people, I think, for good reason, are kind of afraid of a deep inquiry practice, both because they don't want to look inside of themselves, and they don't really want to look at the system that's out of balance.
It's really interesting hearing about you working with young kids. I was wondering if we can take a step even before that and wonder, what can, for instance, parents of very young children, like toddlers, preschoolers, do to kind of work with them and kind of get them into a mode where they're receptive to mindfulness, as they're preparing to go into schools where mindfulness may or may not be part of the curriculum or the understanding.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I just happened to grow up. I grew up at a place called the Omega Institute, which is on the East Coast, which is kind of like Esalen. If you know Esalen down the coast, is like a kind of like a New Age meditation retreat center. So I grew up with people like gurus and shamans and meditators all around. And my parents, though, even though I lived there, I was never once told to meditate or to do yoga or to do any of that. I was just, like a kid. I could just do it. And I actually really like, even though I'm teaching kids mindfulness and I see the benefit of it, especially with younger kids and with parents, what I really recommend is what my experience was with my upbringing is that I had an incredibly empathic and attuned parents. And if I became a good person, it was not because they told me to focus and be nice. It was because they were nice and focused on me. And that's the deepest, this is the first thing I say to teachers as well. When I train teachers, I always, I worked at a school in San Francisco this whole last year. The first 4 months, I only trained teachers. I told them, don't do anything with your kids different. They all explained, and this always happens, that there was big transformations with the kids. And there's actually a recent research study that showed when elementary school teachers are trained in mindfulness, their kids actually act out less and have, the kids transform just because the teachers are being nicer. For parents, that's the practice, is learning how to be present with all of the stress that having a young child has, learning how to work with reactivity and not, basically the classic thing of all of the things that your parents did that you didn't want to do, but you end up doing anyways because it's so hard to be with those emotions inside of ourselves. Okay, let's break this cycle and learn how to, I'm very much of the opinion that the words that we end up saying to our kids are the words that become our kids' inner voices, right? So how are we showing up? So it's just a big call for our own practice, our own emotional intelligence, our own mindfulness practice. With very young kids, if you are really present, there's some very fun games, but they have to be fun. You have a kid lay down and put a little teddy bear on their belly, and as they're breathing in and out, they feel it rising and falling. Or there's some fun kind of relaxation games and little breathing techniques and kind of fun kind of yoga movements. But yeah, I guess I'll end the speech just by saying that the practice is yours. That's where the huge transformation comes in, is when we take ownership of our own inner world and then become that in the world. So thank you all so much for all your time.